The night before my wedding, I pressed my mother's old veil flat beneath a stack of hardcover books so the lace wouldn't wrinkle. I remember smoothing my palm over the cover of the final book and thinking that by this time tomorrow, I would be Mrs. Shin Tae-ho, the wife of one of the most feared Korean Mafia bosses in Seoul. The woman beside the man whose name could empty private elevators, silence boardrooms, and make grown men straighten their jackets before he even walked through the door. I told myself he loved me. Not the way his family loved alliances. Not the way his organization loved loyalty. Me, Kendra Merrick, the woman he had once chosen when choosing me cost him something. 3 days later, I would stand outside a courthouse in a borrowed cream coat, wearing no engagement ring and holding the hand of a completely different man. And I would not feel like I had lost a single thing. My name is Kendra Merrick, and for almost 3 years I was supposed to become Mrs. Shin Tae-ho. I met Tae-ho in the most ordinary way possible, at a supply chain conference in Seoul, in a hallway, over terrible vending machine coffee. I was 26, 3 years out of a business program I'd nearly had to leave halfway through, working a strategy position that had sent me across the Pacific to speak on a panel I wasn't senior enough to be sitting on. The machine ate my money twice. I hit the side of it with my palm. A man's voice behind me said, "Violence usually works better when the machine is afraid of you." I turned. Black suit. No tie. Hair swept neatly back. A face so controlled it looked like smiling had to be approved in advance. He held out his own coffee. "Take mine. I don't know you." "Then we're even." "I don't know you either." That was Shin Tae-ho. I didn't know yet that the 2 men standing 20 feet behind him weren't conference staff. They were security. I didn't know the black sedan waiting across the street had another car behind it, or that a shipping executive I'd watched dominate an entire panel that morning would lower his voice when Tae-ho entered the reception later that evening. I definitely didn't know what people whispered about Shin Group after regular business hours. On paper, it was ports, freight, logistics, real estate and shipping. Underneath the paper was something older. A family organization built on loyalty, favors, territory, and a reputation most people were smart enough not to test. Tae-ho rarely threatened anyone. He didn't need to. People already knew what his name meant. But that wasn't why I fell in love with him. I fell for him because, in the beginning, he made room for me. 3 months after we met, I was working on a regional expansion project with Shin Group when a board member interrupted me twice during the same presentation. Tae-ho put down his pen. "This is Kendra Merrick." The room quieted. "She runs the expansion strategy. If she is speaking, you are listening." The board member never interrupted me again. For a black woman trying to build a career in an industry that repeatedly mistook me for somebody's assistant before seeing the credentials in front of me, that sentence felt like oxygen. My mother had worked 2 jobs so I could finish school. My father had spent 30 years with construction dust permanently buried into the lines of his hands because neither of my parents wanted their children asking anybody's permission to sit at a table they'd earned the right to sit at. So when Tae-ho said my name in rooms that would rather have ignored me, I mistook that for something deeper. I thought being defended meant being understood. I didn't know yet that a man can be proud of your usefulness and still fail to understand your worth. I gave him 3 years before he ever put a ring on my finger. During those years, I built the legitimate side of Shin Group brick by brick. Compliance systems, Western partnerships, port contracts, regulatory structures. The version of the Shin name that could walk into a government hearing and look perfectly respectable no matter what rumors followed its black cars after dark. Every clean contract had some part of my work inside it. Every new international partnership had required me to translate not just language, but culture, expectation, and trust. Tae-ho called it our empire, and for a while, he acted like he meant it. Then something changed. Slowly enough that I kept explaining each piece away. He stopped introducing me as the strategist who ran his expansion team. I became his fiancée. At family dinners, Madam Shin introduced me as Tae-ho's American bride. At one gala, she actually called me his American find. Everyone laughed. I did too. Tae-ho didn't correct her. That should have mattered. I decided it didn't. A year before the wedding, a rival executive asked who had closed a difficult customs agreement in Rotterdam. The binder was sitting directly in front of me. My handwriting covered the margins. Tejo smiled. I handled it. Not we. Not Kendra. I looked at him. He never looked back. That should have mattered too. I told myself marriage would settle things. That once the wedding happened, his family would understand I wasn't temporary. That Madame Shin would finally stop measuring every woman who entered a room against the kind of daughter-in-law she believed her son deserved. She had wanted someone Korean. Old family. Old money. Preferably someone whose parents controlled something useful. Chai Yu-jin fit every requirement. Daughter of a shipping dynasty. Educated in London. Elegant. Connected. And, as I would learn too late, never quite as far in Tejo's past as he had claimed. Our wedding was supposed to be the biggest Gangnam Society event of the season. 400 guests. White orchids flown in from 3 countries. A venue requiring 3 separate security perimeters because half the people attending either controlled major corporations or worked adjacent to men the newspapers politely described as private businessmen. Tejo's family captains would sit on one side, government officials and corporate partners on the other. The gossip pages were already running photographs of my dress fittings. Madame Shin had redesigned the seating chart 5 times. My mother joked that she'd never seen so many people work this hard to make 2 people say 2 words. I laughed. I still thought the wedding was mine. 2 nights before the ceremony, I flew back early from a supplier meeting in Busan. I had the final seating chart with me. 6 hours of work. Names arranged by family, seniority, corporate alliance, and all the invisible rules that existed when a Korean Mafia family invited half the city to watch its heir get married. The rehearsal dinner had already begun. Private hotel ballroom. Crystal walls overlooking Seoul. Black-suited Shin security positioned discreetly near every entrance. I recognized all of them. Men who had watched me enter that family for 3 years. Men who called me Miss Merrick in public and had once started calling me Madam when they thought the wedding was inevitable. I walked through the side corridor expecting to surprise Tejo. Instead, I stopped at the glass wall outside the private dining room. He had Yu-jin against it. His hand was at her waist. Her fingers were curled into the front of his shirt. And Tejo was kissing her. Not a quick mistake. Not something accidental. A kiss long enough that I had time to understand every single detail of what I was seeing. The man I was supposed to marry in 48 hours had another woman pressed against glass with my wedding orchids reflected behind them. And he was doing it where everyone could see. A waiter stopped moving. One of Tejo's cousins looked at the floor. Another turned away so quickly that I knew instantly he'd known before I did. One of the older Shin lieutenants glanced toward Madame Shin. Madame Shin was standing 20 feet away. Watching. Not shocked. Not angry. Just waiting. That's when the humiliation changed. Because betrayal is one thing. Realizing an entire room had already adjusted itself around your betrayal before you arrived is something else. Tejo saw me. His face changed. Kendra! He stepped away from Yu-jin. Not fast enough. Nothing would ever have been fast enough. It's not what it looks like. I looked through the glass behind him, then back at him. You kissed her against a wall. Kendra! At our rehearsal dinner. His security men had gone so still they practically disappeared. I could feel hundreds of eyes pretending not to watch. It was a mistake. No. Picking up somebody else's glass is a mistake. Missing an exit is a mistake. You did not accidentally put your mouth on a woman your mother has wanted you to marry for 3 years. Yu-jin stepped back. Tejo came toward me. She means nothing. Madame Shin's eyes flicked toward Yu-jin. That almost made me laugh. Does she know that? This started 2 weeks ago. It is over. Apparently not. He reached for my left hand. His fingers touched the ring. We are getting married in 2 days. I pulled my hand away. Do you hear yourself? Everyone is already here. There it was. Not I love you. Not forgive me. Not I cannot lose you. Everyone is already here. My mother is here, he said. I looked past him at Madame Shin. Yes, she is. For the first time, Madame Shin stepped forward. This does not need to become public. I stared at her. You watched your son kiss another woman at my rehearsal dinner. Her expression didn't change. This family does not make emotional decisions in public. No. Apparently you make them in glass rooms. Taeho lowered his voice. Kendra, stop. It wasn't a plea. It was the voice he used in boardrooms when people forgot who controlled them. For 3 years, that voice had never been aimed at me. Until that moment. Stop what? Making this larger than it needs to be. Something in me went quiet. Completely quiet. I looked down at the diamond on my hand. 3 years. Every boardroom I'd stood beside him in. Every dinner I'd swallowed Madam Shin's insults through. Every time I'd convinced myself being tolerated was close enough to being loved. Every time I'd allowed him to take credit because I thought we were building the same future. Then I looked at Yu Jin, at Madam Shin, at the relatives who already knew, at the security men who would have obeyed Taeho if he'd told them to clear the entire hotel, at the man himself. You're right. Taeho visibly relaxed, for half a second. This doesn't need to be larger. I pulled the ring off. His eyes dropped to it. Kendra! I drew my arm back and threw it, not at his face. Not because I wanted to hurt him. I threw it across the rehearsal table. The diamond hit the polished wood with a sharp crack, bounced once beside the gold-edged seating chart I'd spent 6 hours preparing, struck a champagne glass, and disappeared into a bed of white orchids. The room gasped. Someone actually gasped. Taeho stared at the flowers, then at me. I slid the seating chart toward him. You'll need to find someone else for the head table. His expression changed. This time it wasn't embarrassment. It was rage. Controlled. Cold. Very Shin Taeho. You'll regret this. Not I'm sorry. You'll regret this. I almost thanked him. Because those 3 words finished whatever the kiss had left alive. Everyone in this city knows you're mine, he said quietly. The older lieutenant nearest us looked away. Taeho stepped closer. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? I picked up my coat. Somewhere nobody mistakes possession for love. Then I walked out. No one stopped me. Not even Taeho. Maybe because he still believed I'd return. Men who have spent their whole lives watching doors open when they approach them rarely imagine someone choosing to close one. That night I called my mother from the hotel. It was after 2. I was still wearing the rehearsal dinner dress. She listened while I told her everything. The kiss. His mother. The room. The ring flying into the orchids. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she said, Baby, your father and I did not work every double shift God gave us so you could spend your life shrinking yourself into somebody else's family photograph. I closed my eyes. I threw the ring. Good, Mama! I'm serious. Took you long enough. I laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. She let me. And for the first time all night, nobody asked me to remain composed. If you've ever watched somebody mistake your patience for permission, subscribe. Because what Taeho did next proved he still had no idea what walking away from him was actually going to cost. Wedding morning came anyway. Madam Shin refused to cancel immediately because hundreds of guests had already arrived. By 9, the cathedral entrance was crowded with luxury vehicles, photographers, and Shin security. Black sedans lined the side street. Family captains moved quietly through the building. Nobody needed to say Mafia wedding. The men positioned at every doorway said enough. I went back for one reason. My mother. She had flown all the way from Georgia. My father was arriving separately. I wanted to look both of them in the face and tell them they hadn't travelled across the world to watch their daughter abandon herself. Madam Shin met me at the side entrance. You will walk the aisle! Not hello. Not, are you all right? You will smile. You will say the vows. Whatever happened between you and my son will be addressed after the photographers leave. I studied her. For 3 years I'd wanted this woman to accept me. Suddenly I couldn't remember why. I'm not marrying him. You do not understand what cancellation means to this family. I finally understand exactly what this family means to me. Her eyes went hard. Kendra! No! Taeho appeared behind her. Tuxedo. Perfect hair. 2 men from his inner security detail waiting far enough away to pretend the conversation was private. 300 people are already seated. Then they can enjoy the flowers. You would humiliate my family over one mistake? I smiled. Not kindly. You humiliated yourself. I'm simply the first person in your life who isn't going to pretend I didn't see it. His jaw tightened. You think walking out makes you powerful? No. I stepped past him. Knowing I can makes me free. I left through the side door while the quartet was still tuning. I remember the music leaking through the cathedral walls behind me. I remember sunlight on the pavement. My mother waiting beside the car. And I remember realizing I didn't feel abandoned. I felt released. What happened next sounds reckless if you only hear the headline. The headline came later. Runaway bride marries Shin rival days after Mafia wedding collapses. That wasn't how it happened. 2 days after I walked out, I went to a courthouse because I needed several legal documents witnessed before I could begin separating my professional work from Shin Group. Nothing romantic, no dress, no revenge plan, just paperwork. I was wearing a cream coat over a simple slip dress I'd bought that morning because every other formal outfit in my hotel suite had been approved by Madam Shin and I couldn't stand looking at them. I stepped out of the car. Hyun-soo was standing on the courthouse steps. Grey suit. No entourage. 2 coffees. I stopped. What are you doing here? He held 1 cup toward me, making a terrible first impression. I took it. Hazelnut. 1 sugar. Exactly right. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me. I looked at him. You weren't invited. I know. How did you know I'd be here? Your attorney called No Holdings about transferring 2 joint compliance files out of Shin Group. I asked where the documents were being processed. That sounds dangerously close to stalking. Then it's fortunate I brought coffee. I almost smiled. Almost. I had known Hyun-soo for 6 years, CEO of No Holdings, Taeho's most irritating legitimate rival. Not because No Holdings was louder, because it didn't need to be. 4 decades of ports, infrastructure and shipping. A reputation strong enough that even the Shin family couldn't casually intimidate it. Taeho commanded rooms through fear. Hyun-soo commanded them because people wanted to keep doing business with him. They hated each other for exactly that reason. The first time Hyun-soo and I really spoke had been at a charity dinner 6 years earlier. His logistics team had been stuck on a customs bottleneck. I grabbed a cocktail napkin and sketched a solution because I'd had 2 glasses of champagne and apparently believed nobody could stop me. He studied it. Then me. Did you just solve a 6-month routing problem during dessert? 8 months, actually. Your people made the same mistake twice, he laughed, not offended. Interested. I forgot about it. He didn't. A year later, rain trapped me outside a conference center. Hyun-soo's car appeared. He rolled down the window. Get in! I have a driver coming. In 40 minutes. How do you know? The road is closed. He told his driver to take the long route and dropped me at my building first. Another year passed. A Shin Group client made a joke in a shared meeting about how Taeho's fiancé talked a lot for someone who wasn't on the board. People laughed. Taeho didn't say anything. Hyun-soo did. I'd trust Kendra Merrick's interpretation of that customs filing over most board members in this building. Silence. He went back to reading his documents like he'd said nothing important. I remembered that. I just didn't let myself examine why. Now he stood outside a courthouse 2 days after my life had become tabloid entertainment. I read the article, he said. The one calling it a misunderstanding? The one written by someone who clearly wasn't there. I sipped the coffee. Why are you here, Hyun-soo? His expression changed. The humor left. I wanted to make sure you weren't alone. I have lawyers. That isn't what I meant. I looked away. Cars passed. People climbed courthouse steps around us. Nobody knew that one of Seoul's most powerful CEOs was standing beside the former fiancé of a Korean mafia boss, trying very hard not to say something he'd apparently been waiting years to say. Finally, he did. Marry me, I laughed because the alternative was dropping the coffee. Excuse me? That came out badly. Badly. Catastrophically. I cancelled one wedding 48 hours ago. I know. And you're proposing outside a courthouse. Also aware. Are you insane? Possibly. I turned toward him. Do you think I'm going to marry Taeho's rival because I'm angry? No, because if that's what this is, it isn't. Then what is it? Hyun-soo looked at me for a long moment. I have wanted to ask you some version of that question since you fixed my supply chain on a cocktail napkin. My mouth opened. Closed. You've wanted to marry me for 6 years? I've wanted the chance to love you for 6 years. That landed differently. Why didn't you say anything? You chose him. His answer came immediately. You were building a life with somebody else. I had no right to make my feelings another problem you had to manage. That was the first thing that stopped me, because Taeho had spent 3 years assuming his wants created obligations for everybody around him. Hyun-soo had wanted me for 6 years and considered that his problem. Not mine. Still, I shook my head. I can't do this. Then don't. I stared at him. He nodded toward the courthouse. Do your paperwork. Go home. Sleep for a week. Go to Georgia. Start another company. Never speak to me again if that's what you need. You just proposed, and you're allowed to say no. You came all this way. Kendra. His voice softened. Nothing I do for you creates a debt you owe me. I stopped breathing for a second. He continued. I don't want you because Taeho lost you. I wanted you when he still had every reason to believe you'd stay. If you never marry me, that doesn't become less true. Then he stepped aside, giving me the courthouse doors, giving me the decision. I walked past him. Inside, I met my attorney, signed 2 forms, reviewed a 3rd, and spent 22 minutes pretending I wasn't thinking about a man downstairs who had just offered me something Taeho never had, choice without pressure. When I came back outside, Hyun-soo was still there. He hadn't followed me in. The second coffee was gone. Mine was empty too. Still insane? I asked, almost certainly. If I say yes, it will not be because of him. I know. It will not be revenge. I know. I keep my name. Obviously. My company stays mine. Absolutely. You don't speak for me. He smiled slightly. I've spent 6 years enjoying listening to you speak for yourself. I looked at the courthouse, then at him. Do you still mean it? Every word. I took his hand. Then ask me again. Something shifted across his face. Not triumph. Not relief. Something quieter. Hope. Kendra Merrick, will you marry me? This time I knew exactly what I was choosing. Yes. 11 minutes later, we were standing in front of a clerk who had absolutely no idea she was about to create the biggest business scandal Seoul had seen that year. No orchids, no photographers, no Shin family, no security perimeter, no 400 guests. Just Hyun-soo, me, 2 witnesses pulled from his legal team, and a courthouse employee who mispronounced both our names. It was better than the wedding I'd spent a year planning, because nobody there needed me to perform anything. The story hit the press before sunset. Merrick marries CO rival after Shin wedding collapse. Taeho's former bride weds, no holdings CO. Shin Air humiliated in stunning reversal. That last headline was the one that reached Taeho. He called 11 times. I answered none. By the next morning, the story had moved beyond society pages, because everybody understood what the photographs meant. A Korean Mafia boss whose family had spent decades selling the appearance of total control had publicly lost his bride to one of the only CEOs in the region who had never been afraid of him. And Taeho hated losing, almost as much as he hated being watched while it happened. He gave an interview, called the marriage impulsive, called me unstable, said the Shin family was concerned for my well-being. Hyun-soo watched the clip beside me at breakfast. He turned off the television. You want no holdings to respond? No. Good. I looked at him. Good? You don't owe him a performance. Nova Ellery, my assistant of 4 years, and the only person from Shin Group who re-signed the week I left, eventually convinced me to release one sentence. Not about the affair. Not about the marriage. About my work. No Holdings press office issued it without embellishment. Every filing bearing Kendra Merrick's signature remains accurate and stands on its own record. That was all. 11 words. It appeared beneath Taeho's interview the next morning. A quiet fact beneath a loud lie. He hated it. I knew because flowers arrived that afternoon. 4 dozen white roses. The same kind Taeho used to send after arguments when he wanted an apology to happen without actually giving one. I sent them to reception. The staff divided them between their desks. 2 days later, a watch arrived. More expensive than my mother's house. The note read, "Come home." Hyun-soo saw the box. He didn't touch it. What do you want to do? Return it, he nodded. No jealousy, no speech, no attempt to decide for me. I noticed everything now. The following week, an industry blog published a piece describing me as an American outsider who had overestimated her importance at Shin Group. The language was careful, corporate on the surface. ugly underneath. A black woman with ambition becomes arrogant very quickly in certain people's vocabulary. I recognized Taiho's fingerprints. What he hadn't expected was that the partners I'd worked with for 3 years knew me better than the article's anonymous source did. 2 called me directly. 1 asked whether I wanted their legal department to issue a correction. I said no. The article disappeared 3 days later anyway. Taiho tried old friends next. Women I'd eaten dinner with. People who suddenly wanted to tell me how badly he was doing. He's barely sleeping. Madam Shin is worried. He keeps asking about you. Just 1 dinner, Kendra. Finally, I told one of them. The last dinner I attended as his fiancée ended with him kissing another woman. I think I've exhausted my appetite. I stopped answering afterward. The old Kendra would have kept explaining herself until everybody understood. The woman married to Hyun-soo was starting to learn that being misunderstood isn't always an emergency. And marriage to Hyun-soo was nothing like I expected. Not because he buried me in luxury. He could have. He didn't. Our first proper dinner after the courthouse wasn't in a private room. It was at a noodle stall near the port his grandfather had been visiting since before Hyun-soo was born. 3 stools. No sign. A woman behind the counter who yelled at him for not coming often enough. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my chopsticks. You let her speak to you like that? She knew me before I had employees. Terrifying. More than your ex. That made me pause. He saw it. I'm sorry. No, it's fine. You don't have to talk about him. That was new too. Taiho had always wanted the answer immediately. Hyun-soo could leave a silence alone. That night he told me about his grandfather making him memorize shipping manifests before he was allowed dessert. I told him about my father's hands after construction jobs, about the scholarship that almost didn't come through, about the year my mother worked double shifts. Things Taiho technically knew but had never sat quietly enough to hear. Hyun-soo listened without touching his phone, without interrupting, without waiting for his turn to speak. Weeks passed. The scandal got louder. Our apartment got quieter. One night, I was standing in the kitchen staring at nothing. Hyun-soo walked in. Didn't ask what was wrong, just leaned against the counter. After a while, I said, I keep thinking I should be doing something. About what? Everything. You spent years holding entire rooms together. So maybe you're allowed to sit in one for a while. I started crying. Immediately. Embarrassingly. Hyun-soo didn't rush across the kitchen and turn it into a dramatic scene. He handed me a towel because it was closer than the tissues. That made me laugh while I was still crying. And somewhere in that ridiculous little moment, the courthouse marriage stopped feeling impulsive. It started feeling safe. I met Chairman No properly the following month, 81 years old. Still called chairman even though he'd handed the company to Hyun-soo almost a decade earlier. He studied me across an unreasonable amount of tea, then smiled. So, I waited. 6 years, Hyun-soo sighed. Grandfather. The old man ignored him. 6 years this boy asked at family dinners if I had heard anything about the woman who corrected his shipping plan on a napkin. I looked at Hyun-soo. His ears actually turned red. I had never seen that before. 6 years? Chairman No nodded. I told him, speak to her. She was engaged. Later. Still engaged. Later again. Hyun-soo rubbed his forehead. His grandfather leaned toward me. I raised a very successful coward. I laughed. Chairman No patted my hand. Whatever Shin Taiho did to lose you, I hope he thinks about it for a very long time. I didn't expect the warmth in his voice. Not because he hated Taiho, because he loved Hyun-soo. That distinction mattered. The Shin family had always treated marriage like acquisition. Chairman No treated my arrival like his grandson had finally been given a reason to smile more often. There was no test, no inspection, no list of ways I needed to become appropriate. I went home and cried again. Hyun-soo found that deeply funny. You cry after meeting everybody in my family? Only the ones who aren't horrible. That's encouraging. The first real attack on my career came a few weeks later. Taiho tried to pressure 3 firms inside a regional shipping consortium to distance themselves from No Holdings. He wasn't subtle enough. 2 warned Hyun-soo directly. Not because they were loyal. Because an angry Mafia heir using business alliances to punish his former fiancé's new husband looked less like power than instability. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering that Shin Taiho was dangerous. They were whispering that he might be losing control. That mattered far more to him. A Shin lieutenant could survive being hated. Being doubted was worse. If you think the most satisfying revenge is sometimes simply refusing to save the person who underestimated you from the consequences they created themselves, tell me in the comments. Would you have let Taeho's empire fall, or would you have helped because of the years you once shared? I didn't sabotage Shin Group. I didn't need to. 3 years of my work were already answering the question. Nova pulled the files, partnership agreements, compliance records, regulatory approvals, port documentation. Contracts whose executives had spent years calling me directly because Taeho hated sitting through detailed review sessions and I didn't. The pattern was obvious. The legitimate expansion everybody publicly associated with Taeho had depended heavily on relationships I'd personally built. Not because I was secretly responsible for every dollar in his empire. I wasn't. But the most profitable international division carried my fingerprints across nearly every load-bearing agreement. When I left, the contracts didn't vanish. Trust did. That is much harder to replace. 3 Western partners requested private meetings. Not because I called them away from Shin Group, because they wanted to know who would now be responsible for the systems I'd managed. At one meeting, an executive turned a compliance file toward me. "We were told you left because of personal instability." I almost smiled. I left because the man I was supposed to marry kissed another woman in front of our wedding guests. Silence. The filing you're holding is accurate. So are the others. What has changed is that I'm no longer the person responsible for guaranteeing that Shin Group continues operating to the standards I built. The executive looked at Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo said nothing. That mattered. He didn't claim me. Didn't sell no holdings. Didn't turn my humiliation into his opportunity. He let me speak. The first partner eventually withdrew from Shin Group's expansion. Another demanded additional oversight. The bank asked for more collateral. The insurer raised its risk review. 4 separate consequences from one underlying problem. Taeho had spent years putting his name on a system whose credibility depended partly on somebody he had treated as replaceable. Madam Shin came to see me. She arrived at my new office with 2 black Shin vehicles and enough security to make the lobby employees nervous. I watched her through the glass wall before she entered. For years I'd been intimidated by that woman. Now she was sitting in my waiting room because she needed something. Interesting how quickly fear changes shape. "You can stop this." She sat across from me. No greeting, no apology. "The partners trust you. They trust my work. Then tell them the transition at Shin Group is stable." "Is it?" Her lips tightened. "Kendra, that's my name." "You were always the reasonable one." I leaned back. "Where was reasonable when your son kissed Yoo-jin at my rehearsal dinner while you stood close enough to hear her breathing?" For the first time, Madam Shin had no immediate answer. "Families survive mistakes. So do women. This marriage to know, my marriage is not your business. It is revenge." "No." I smiled slightly. "That is the part none of you can stand." She stared at me. "If I'd married Hyun-soo to punish Taeho, your son would still be at the center of my life. He's not." That landed. Madam Shin left without asking again. Yoo-jin left Taeho before the month ended. I found out from Nova. Her family's planned shipping alliance with Shin Group had stalled as confidence around Taeho weakened. What had once looked like a romantic scandal turned out to have been partially cultivated as a family contingency. Madam Shin had known about Taeho and Yoo-jin long before the rehearsal dinner. Not every detail. Enough. Yoo-jin had been the acceptable alternative. The alliance bride. The woman waiting in case the American strategist stopped being useful. I had spent 3 years believing I was the plan. I had actually been the version of the plan that made international partners comfortable. That realization hurt differently from the kiss. Taeho had loved me. I believe that. But his family had valued me. There is a difference. And Taeho had allowed their value system to infect his love until he could no longer tell the difference himself. I ran into Yoo-jin once. Hotel lobby. Neither of us expected the other. She stopped. I almost kept walking. Then she said, "I didn't know everything." I turned. Her confidence was gone. Not destroyed, just quieter. "I knew he was engaged," she said. "I knew his mother wanted us together. I didn't know how much they were using me to pressure you." I studied her. "I don't need an apology. I wasn't going to ask you to forgive me." "Good," she looked down. "I thought if he chose me, It meant I won. I understood that more than I wanted to. And she gave a small, bitter laugh. It meant he was capable of making both of us feel temporary. I nodded. For what it's worth, you didn't destroy my life. She looked up. You showed me something I was refusing to see. We walked away in opposite directions. No screaming, no humiliation, no villainous dragged through a room. Because Jin wasn't the center of what happened to me. Taeho was. And I refused to make another woman carry the entire weight of a man's betrayal just because it would have made the story easier. Taeho's next move was Hyun-soo. He requested a private meeting. Strictly business. Hyun-soo told me beforehand. Do you want me to refuse? No. You sure? Yes. What do you want me to say? Whatever you actually think. He smiled. That's why I married you. The meeting happened inside No Holdings' executive floor. Taeho arrived with 4 men. Not lawyers, not executives, his inner security detail. A deliberate reminder of who he was. Hyun-soo entered alone. Also deliberate. Taeho looked around the room. No guards? I have them. Where? Where security belongs. Outside the meeting, Taeho sat. You think taking my partners makes you untouchable? I haven't taken anything. Don't insult me. Your partners reconsidered their relationship with you. Because of her. Because you spent 3 years convincing everyone your company was stable while the woman maintaining half your international relationships was treated like decoration. Taeho's eyes hardened. She's mine. Hyun-soo's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Disgust. Don't say that again. Taeho leaned forward. 10 years from now, she'll come back. Women always come back when they remember what real power feels like. Hyun-soo actually laughed. Quietly. That's your problem. What is? You think power is the reason she stayed. The room went silent. She was never yours, Taeho. She chose you. Those are not the same thing. Taeho stood. His men shifted outside the glass. Hyun-soo didn't move. For decades, the Shin family's reputation had made businessmen calculate every sentence before speaking. Hyun-soo had never done that. No Holdings had its own security, its own ports, its own 4 decades of legitimate influence, its own relationships. Taeho could frighten plenty of people, just not this one. And nothing infuriates a man who has built his identity on fear more than discovering somebody simply isn't afraid. When Hyun-soo came home that night, he didn't tell the story like he'd won. He took off his shoes, loosened his tie, sat beside me on the floor while we ate takeout, then said, "He still thinks you'll go back." I looked at him. Does that bother you? No? Really? It makes me sad for him. I laughed. That's cruel. I'm serious. He picked up another dumpling. Imagine loving you and still understanding you that poorly. That quiet sentence stayed with me longer than anything Taeho had said during 3 years of engagement. The apology came 7 weeks after the wedding that never happened. Rain, of course. Taeho appeared outside my office without his security detail. That alone told me something had changed. I had never seen him cross a public sidewalk alone. No driver waiting. No lieutenant 2 steps behind. Just Taeho. Wet black coat, hair ruined by the rain. Looking less like a feared Mafia boss than a man who had finally discovered his name couldn't reverse time. I'm sorry. I stayed under the awning. For what? His face tightened. For Jin! I waited. For the rehearsal dinner. Still waiting. For what my mother did. There, his mother. Jin! The dinner. Everything except himself. Come back. No! Kendra, we can rebuild. Rebuild what? Everything. He stepped closer. The company. What we had. Those are 2 different things. I love you. I believed him. That's what made the answer easy. You probably do. His expression broke slightly. But loving me badly isn't a reason for me to return. Hyun-soo doesn't know you the way I do. I almost laughed. Hyun-soo knew how I take my coffee before you knew which contracts in your company I actually negotiated. Taeho looked away. I made mistakes. You made choices. I'm sorry. I nodded. I forgive you. His entire body changed. Relief. Immediate. He thought forgiveness was the door. It wasn't. I'm not coming back. The relief vanished. Kendra, forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. He stared at me. You finally saying sorry does not create an obligation for me to return to the place that taught me I had to disappear to be loved. Rain ran down his face. For the first time, Taeho had nothing to say. Then he reached for the one language he still understood: business. The compliance renewal is due in 6 weeks. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. Without my signature and the relationships attached to it, the port expansion faced a difficult review. I know! The project could collapse. I know. You could fix it. I looked directly at him. So could you? His eyebrows pulled together. You built a company that depended too heavily on one woman while simultaneously convincing yourself that woman was replaceable. That isn't my emergency anymore. Kendra. I spent 3 years building your legitimate empire. He didn't move. I just built it under the wrong man's name. Then I walked inside. The renewal failed 6 weeks later. Not because I interfered. Not because Hyun-soo pulled strings. Because regulators asked questions Shin Group could no longer answer with the credibility they'd relied on when I was there. The port project stalled. One major partner withdrew. The board demanded restructuring. 2 senior executives resigned. Director Yoon, who had served the Shin family 11 years, reportedly told Taeho, "I am too old to keep pretending loyalty means protecting people from consequences they created themselves." That sentence made its way through the industry in less than a day. The Shin name still meant something. It always would. But people were no longer organizing rooms around Taeho the same way. That was the real collapse. Not money. My ex-fiancé had spent his whole adult life believing everyone around him was responding to strength. Some of them had only been responding to fear. Once the fear weakened, he discovered how little loyalty fear actually buys. Hyun-soo never celebrated, never opened champagne over Shin Group's losses, never showed me Taeho's falling stock price, never asked whether I felt vindicated. Instead, he took me to work. My work. The independent consulting company I'd quietly rebuilt after leaving Shin Group. He helped me find office space. Not by buying it, by sending me listings. He introduced me to no clients unless I asked. He never invested a cent without being invited. When one of his executives suggested No Holdings acquire my company to simplify things, Hyun-soo shut the idea down before I even knew the conversation happened. I found out later. Why didn't you tell me? Because there was nothing to tell. Your company isn't mine to acquire. You could have at least discussed it. He looked concerned. Did you want me to? No. Then I finally got one right. I laughed. This was the difference between us. Taeho had loved me by folding me into himself. Hyun-soo loved me by protecting the parts of my life that didn't belong to him. The napkin appeared in June. I was in his office looking for a report when I noticed a cheap black frame hidden behind a stack of quarterly filings. Inside was a cocktail napkin. Lines. Arrows. My handwriting. I stared. You kept this? Hyun-soo froze in the doorway. Oh, it's less embarrassing when you don't find it yourself. I held it up. This is 6 years old. I know. It's literally trash. It saved my logistics division 8 months of work. I was showing off. Successfully. I turned the frame over. The date was written on the back. 6 years earlier. You really remembered me all that time? His expression softened. I remembered everything. Then he told me what I hadn't known. Not that he'd secretly funded my life. He hadn't. That would have ruined everything I'd come to understand about him. Instead, he'd noticed opportunities. When my independent firm launched after I left Shin Group, a preservation company looking for international strategy had been considering 3 consultants. Hyun-soo had been asked for recommendations. He gave them 4 names. Mine was one. He didn't tell them to choose me. They did. Another time, a university scholarship committee asked No Holdings for suggestions on where to direct an anonymous corporate education fund. He suggested expanding eligibility to students from working-class families in international business programs because he'd once heard me describe almost leaving university for lack of tuition. He never attached my name, never made the scholarship about me. It simply became the kind of program he thought should exist because a woman he admired had once needed one. Why didn't you tell me? Because then it would have become something you thought you owed me for. I put the napkin down. You really thought about that? For 6 years? My throat tightened. I don't know whether that's romantic or ridiculous. Chairman No votes ridiculous, I laughed. Then Hyun-soo looked at me. Really looked. I never wanted to build your life for you, Kendra. His voice was quieter now. I wanted a world where women like you didn't have to fight so hard for permission to build it themselves. That was the moment I fell in love with my husband. Not outside the courthouse. Not when he remembered my coffee. Not even when he'd defended me in that boardroom years earlier. Right there, with an old cocktail napkin between us. Because loving somebody's strength is easy. Respecting their ownership of it is harder. By July, our courthouse marriage no longer felt like something that had happened to me. It felt like a decision I kept making again. We attended an industry summit together, the first major event where we appeared publicly as husband and wife rather than scandal. Reporters lined the entrance. Someone shouted whether No Holdings and my company planned to merge. Hyun-soo stopped, looked at me before answering a question about my business. I gave him a tiny shake of my head. No, he told the reporter. My wife has her own company. The reporter tried again. Wouldn't combining operations make financial sense? Possibly, Hyun-soo smiled. But not everything valuable needs to belong to the same person. I looked at him. He continued walking. That man knew exactly what he was doing. Taeho was at the summit, alone near the bar. No 6-man security formation. No circle of executives waiting for permission to laugh. One discreet guard across the room. His family still had power, but the atmosphere around him had changed. People no longer rushed to fill the silence. He watched Hyun-soo and me cross the ballroom. Our eyes met. For 1 second, I remembered the rehearsal dinner, the glass wall, Jin, the orchids, the diamond ring flying from my hand. Then Hyun-soo touched my elbow. Not possessively, just enough to ask without speaking whether I was okay. I nodded and kept walking. I didn't need Taeho to suffer forever. I needed him to understand. There is a difference. We held a real wedding in September. Not because the courthouse marriage wasn't real, because I wanted my parents to see me walk down an aisle that actually belonged to me. 200 guests, small garden, flowers grown locally, no security perimeter disguised as decoration, no 400-person alliance summit pretending to be a wedding. Nova stood beside me. My father cried before the music even started. My mother whispered, "Don't ruin your makeup," then cried harder than he did. Chairman No wore a tie he'd apparently owned since 1987 and refused to replace. Hyun-soo stood beneath an archway waiting for me. No nerves hidden behind arrogance. No family strategy. Just the man. Taeho came. Not inside. He stood beyond the front gate. Security stopped him there. No threats. No confrontation. Hyun-soo had specifically instructed them that Taeho was to be treated respectfully. He doesn't need humiliation, he'd told the team. He needs a boundary. From across the garden, I saw Taeho. Black suit, hands at his sides. A man whose organization had once taught half the city that a Shin could enter almost any room he wanted. That day, the gate stayed closed. He watched Hyun-soo put a ring on my finger. A new ring. Nothing like the one I'd thrown into white orchids months before. Hyun-soo's hand trembled slightly. I smiled. His did too. Taeho didn't shout, didn't demand entry, didn't summon anyone. For once, he understood that power sometimes means respecting a door after someone closes it. He left before the reception. I didn't ask where he went. Months later, Shin Group entered restructuring. Not bankruptcy. Not destruction. Reality. Taeho had to rebuild the legitimate side of his company without me. And perhaps that was a better punishment than losing everything. He had to learn. He had to sit in compliance hearings, read the documents, listen to the executives he'd spent years interrupting, build relationships that couldn't be inherited from his father's name or enforced through fear. Nova ran into him at a regional trade dinner that winter. She told me the room no longer rearranged itself when he entered. He looked different, she said. Older? No. She thought about it. Human. I understood. That winter, Hyun-soo asked whether I regretted anything. We were sitting by the fireplace in our house. My name was on the deed. So was his. But my company headquarters downtown had one name on the wall. Merrick Strategy Group. Nothing before it. Nothing after it. Mine. Do you regret him? Hyun-soo asked. No! The wedding? No! The 3 years? I thought about it. They weren't wasted. He waited. I built something real. I looked toward the window. I just built it in the wrong man's name the first time. And now? I smiled. Now my name is the only one on the wall. Hyun-soo nodded. It should be. No joke. No suggestion we combine businesses. No future plaque with both our names. His company was his. Mine was mine. Our marriage existed between them. That was enough. A few weeks later, I gave a keynote at the same supply chain conference where I'd once been the 26-year-old woman arguing with a vending machine. Afterward, a young black analyst approached me. She looked nervous. Can I ask you something that has nothing to do with shipping? Those are usually the better questions, she smiled. How do you know if a man is building something with you or just using you to build something for him? I looked at her. For a moment, I saw myself, the degree, the ambition, the hunger to be taken seriously. The way attention from the right, powerful man can feel like validation when you've spent years having to prove yourself twice. You usually find out the first time you stop being useful to him. She frowned slightly. I continued. A good man can admire what you do without confusing it with who you are. He doesn't need you productive, agreeable, impressive, or convenient every day in order to still want you standing beside him. She nodded. I hoped she remembered. I still have my mother's veil. The one I pressed beneath hardcover books the night before I was supposed to marry Shin Tae-ho. I keep it in a cedar box. Not because I miss that wedding, because it reminds me how close I came to walking down an aisle toward a life where everybody knew what I could do and almost nobody cared what I wanted. Sometimes I think about the ring. I never went back for it. Madam Shin's florist apparently found it in the orchids the following morning. According to Nova, Tae-ho kept it. For months. Maybe he still has it. That's his business. Mine is the ring I wear now. The husband who never needed me to become smaller so he could feel larger. The company with my name on the wall. And the life I chose after a man who thought I belonged to him publicly kissed his mistress 48 hours before our wedding. Tae-ho thought throwing away his ring was the most reckless thing I'd ever done. It wasn't. The reckless thing had been spending 3 years believing love required me to explain away every moment that made me feel invisible. Throwing that ring was the first clear decision I'd made in a long time. Marrying Hyun-soo wasn't revenge. It wasn't an escape. It wasn't a woman replacing one powerful man with another. It was me recognizing the difference between a man who wanted to possess my loyalty and one who respected my freedom enough to let me choose him. And I chose him. If you've made it this far, subscribe for more stories of Korean mafia romance, powerful black women, betrayal, obsession, emotional justice, and the kind of love that has to earn its second chance or accept that it won't get one. And tell me this. If you had been standing in that rehearsal room, watching your Korean mafia fiancé publicly kiss the woman his family always wanted him to marry, would you have thrown away the ring and walked out? Or would you have given him one more chance? Because Shin Tae-ho spent years believing the most dangerous thing about him was his name. He was wrong. The most dangerous thing in his life was the day the woman holding his empire together finally realized she could let go. He didn't understand what he had while I was standing behind him. He understands now.